The stars had forgotten their names. That's what it felt like, when the transmissions stopped, when the embassies fell silent, when the last Earth ship blinked off the galactic charts and no one asked where it had gone. Mankind hadn't just disappeared. They'd been erased. Quietly. Deliberately. Not a war. Not a treaty. Just silence. For the rest of the galaxy, it was almost a relief. Humans had always been difficult, restless, proud, relentless in their curiosity and even worse in their grief. They moved too fast, burned too bright. They didn't bow when others bowed, didn't quit when it made sense to quit. Some said it was only a matter of time before they destroyed themselves anyway. So when the great storms came, radiation flares swallowing entire Terran colonies, famine carving through their frontier worlds, the mysterious collapse of their core systems, it was easier for the others to look away. No one helped. And the humans never asked. They just vanished. 50 years passed. 50 years of peace. 50 years of forgetting. But peace has teeth. And forgetting doesn't mean forgiven. It began on a moon no one cared about, an uninhabited husk circling a red dwarf at the edge of mapped space. A mining crew went dark, then another. A patrol drone recorded strange shadows across the dust, two-legged shapes where nothing living should be. Sensors caught an EM spike so sharp it melted the satellite's core. Then silence. Again. Galactic Council fleets were dispatched. They expected pirates. Smugglers. At worst, a rogue AI. What they found instead, what survived long enough to send back recordings, didn't make sense. Steel torn like cloth. Armor peeled open like fruit skin. Screaming. Always the screaming. But worst of all, the voices. Human voices. Not automated. Not simulated. Real. And they weren't begging. They were promising. I remember what you did. I remember who turned away. I remember everything. The council called them ghosts. Impossible. Irrational. But systems began failing across dozens of sectors. Civilian traffic rerouted. Trade convoys disappeared. A freighter drifted into port with its crew frozen inside, eyes wide, mouths open, clutching at nothing. No wounds. No heat loss. No life. But scrawled across the inside of the cockpit, burned into the walls by plasma scorch. We came back different. Panic spread. One empire blamed another. Accusations. Retaliation. Skirmishes. But the attacks never followed patterns. Never claimed territory. Never broadcast demands. They weren't trying to conquer. They were proving a point. In time, whispers began surfacing. From the criminal underground. From Black Ops archives buried under classified seals. Even from old traders who used to dock on Earth before it went dark. They'd seen something. A ship that shouldn't exist. A silhouette that didn't match any known registry. Black like the void but darker. Moving in absolute silence, no emissions, no thrust trail. Just there. Watching. Waiting. One trader said he hailed it. Got no reply. But his screen flickered, just for a second, and a message flashed before his eyes. You left us to die. The story spread in hushed tones. The humans hadn't died. They changed. Whatever storm had torn through their worlds, whatever forced them to survive without help, had twisted something deep inside them. Not just physically. Spiritually. They were no longer asking to join the galactic community. They weren't knocking. They were kicking the door in. No one had seen a face yet. Only wreckage. Only whispers. Until the council ship Verdict Ion made contact. An advanced diplomatic vessel, shielded and armed, escorted by 3 battleships. They were sent to the border system of Antheos, where the latest attack had occurred. Their mission, seek peace. Find the humans if they were out there. Reason. Remind them of what it meant to be civilized. The message was sent in all languages, including Old Terran Standard. We acknowledge your suffering. Let us speak. For 3 days they received nothing. Then on the 4th the stars went black. It wasn't nightfall. It wasn't interference. A ship had arrived. Not drifted. Not warped in with ceremony. It had appeared. A shape the size of a small moon but matte and formless. No windows. No lights. No insignia. It didn't belong to any known species. The comms room on Verdict Ion went dead. The battleships readied weapons. And then I reply. It wasn't a voice. Not at first. Just a pulse. Low, rhythmic like a heartbeat played through metal. Then words. One voice. Mel. Human. But wrong. Too calm. Too clear. Too steady for the madness behind it. 50 years, it said. You watched us burn. Now we watch you. The Admiral tried to reason. Begged even. Explained the failures, the lack of knowledge, the chaos of the era. We didn't know, he shouted. The voice didn't argue, didn't scream, didn't threaten. It simply replied, "We did." And the signal ended. Seconds later, the battleships vanished. Not exploded, not fired upon, just gone. Like pixels wiped from a screen. The verdict ion remained untouched, silent, paralyzed, and orbiting above it, close enough now for its surface to be seen, was the human ship. Or what used to be human. It didn't look built. It looked grown. Parts of it shimmered like obsidian. Other sections pulsed like muscle. The stars behind it seemed to twist unnaturally, as if they were afraid to shine on it. The council recalled the verdict ion. The footage leaked. The galaxy panicked. Everyone had different theories. Some called it a weaponized planet. Others said it wasn't a ship at all but something alive. A being. A hive. A god. But all agreed on one thing. The humans hadn't returned for peace. They'd returned to remind the stars what it meant to feel fear. In the old colonies, barely repaired since the Terran fall, people huddled behind rusted walls and prayed to names long buried. The children didn't understand, but the elders did. They remembered the look in human eyes, when they'd been betrayed. When the last Council aid ship turned away from Earth. When the feeds were cut. When the emergency codes were ignored. They remembered how the humans stopped asking. And what happened when they started building instead. No one knows what kept them alive out there. Some say they tapped into physics the rest of the galaxy didn't dare study. Others say they unlocked something in their DNA, something old, something primal. Or maybe it was never science. Maybe it was just rage. Focused. Cultivated. Cold. One report claimed that recovered wreckage bore strange markings. Ancient symbols that no longer matched any Terran nation. A new language. A new culture. As if humanity, once shattered, had reforged itself into something sharper. Something unforgiving. Rumors began to spread that a list was circulating. Not digitally. Not hacked. A physical list. Written on metal. Engraved with the names of every species that had turned their backs. Every world that had refused shelter. Every ambassador that had closed their gates. And one by one those names were being crossed out. Entire moons were found hollowed. Stations left intact but empty. Ships adrift with not a single sign of struggle, just the feeling that someone had looked them in the eyes and decided. The council convened in crisis. Debates erupted. Should they fight? Negotiate? Apologize? No consensus. Because beneath the protocol and polished uniforms, one thing was true. They had known. And they'd done nothing. Now, whatever humanity had become, they were back. Not looking for justice. Not even revenge. Just remembrance. And reckoning. A final report, smuggled out of a neutral science outpost, contained one last strange detail. A survivor. Malnourished. Eyes clouded with radiation scars. Found on an abandoned freighter drifting near the dead wastes. He spoke only in whispers but repeated one sentence again and again. They're not like us anymore, they listened to the silence too long. When asked who they were, he looked up with trembling lips. Us. They were us. But they let go of the part that needed mercy. And then he died. No one knows when the next strike will come. No one knows how far they'll go. But one thing is certain now. Humanity didn't fade. They remembered. And the stars. The stars have started whispering again. They stopped sleeping. Not from fear. That came later. At first, it was instinct, the kind that lives deep in the spine older than thought. The kind of fear that wakes you in the night without a sound, makes you hold your breath even when nothing's moved. That primal voice that says something is wrong, even if you don't understand why. After the last known human broadcast, sleep became a risk. Even the crews of deep space stations, one station light years from any known incident, kept their weapons within reach. Doors were triple sealed. Patrols doubled. Every crew member was assigned a sleep cycle monitor, not for safety, but so someone would know if they stopped breathing in the dark. But it didn't help. Something was spreading. Not disease. Not sabotage. A presence. Like the galaxy itself had tilted slightly toward some hidden center. A pull you couldn't name. On Vorex Station, a communications relay near the trade spine, 27 crew members filed for transfer within the same day. When questioned, their reports were nearly identical. They claimed the shadows weren't staying where they should. Claimed they saw reflections of people who weren't there. One of them, an engineer named Laron, refused to leave his bunk. Said he kept hearing voices in the static, voices that spoke in old Earth languages. I heard them say my name, he whispered during debriefing. And it wasn't a threat. It was a memory. The medic laughed nervously. You're just tired. Your mind's playing tricks. But Laron shook his head. No, it wasn't mine. It was theirs. No one knew what to do with that. And a week later he vanished. No breach. No airlock logs. His bunk perfectly made. But his locker was left open. Inside, scrawled on the wall in dried grease. They remembered me before I remembered them. Across the galaxy, similar reports kept trickling in. Sightings. Whispers. The council tried to suppress the panic, but you can't silence something that isn't speaking. The attacks were never in the same system twice. No patterns. No signatures. But every time it left a message. Not always words. Sometimes it was just a symbol, a circle broken by a jagged line through the middle. Burned into control panels. Etched into station floors. Left behind like fingerprints no one could trace. Other times it was bodies. But never torn. Never bloodied. Just gone. Like the soul had left, and the body gave up waiting for it to return. Whole governments started banning the old Terran language from their systems. They said it was for security. Said it would slow the threat. But underneath all the excuses was the same truth. They were afraid of being understood. Because if humans had truly returned, if the ones doing this still spoke the old words, then someone had to listen. And listening meant guilt. A diplomat from the Vetchin Imperium, the same species who once hosted the final Terran delegation before the fall, publicly denied ever meeting humans at all. Said the records were fabricated. Denied ever offering Earth aid or turning it away. 2 days later his mansion burned to the ground. No signs of arson. No ignition point. Just ash. And a single panel of polished metal left standing in the center. On it, etched in flawless Terran script. Erasure doesn't clean the blood. It only hides it until we return. The mystery deepened. A task force was formed in secret. Elite researchers, old military veterans, historians, anyone with first-hand knowledge of humanity before the collapse. They called it Project Emberfall. Their goal wasn't defense. It was understanding. But there was a problem. No one knew which humans had come back. Humanity hadn't been a single empire. It was fragmented even before the fall. Dozens of colonies, cultures, and alliances. They hadn't always agreed. Some even fought each other. So which branch returned? Some argued it was the Unity Fleet, the deep space explorers lost during the early expansion era. Others believed it was the Ark colonies, long rumored to be building something hidden in the outer void. There were even whispers that a rogue AI from Earth's last war had preserved consciousness from the fallen world, fusing man and machine into something new. But none of the theories fit completely. Because whatever had returned, it wasn't asking to be understood. It didn't speak in alliances. It didn't wear colors. It didn't even claim revenge. Just watched, waited, and struck. When the High Parliament of Draysha announced they would be fortifying all their trade routes against unknown threats, 2 of their moons blinked off long-range sensors the same night. No explosions. No radiation spikes. Just a final signal, looped 30 seconds of silence followed by a breath. Just one. And then static. The deeper Project Emberfall dug, the more fractures they found. It wasn't just that humanity had been left to die. It was how. 50 years ago, when the storms began, the other species thought Earth would ask for help. Thought humanity would follow the rules. But Earth didn't. The pleas came from the outer colonies instead. The ones too far for the inner planets to reach. They begged for ships, medicine, even evacuation. But no one answered. Because those colonies had nothing left to offer. The Council had already taken their minerals. Their water. Their tech. When Earth tried to centralize, tried to pull back and unify, the galaxy called it aggression. So the help never came. And by the time Earth did fall silent, the rest had already turned the page. One entry in Emberfall's archive stood out. A personal log, decades old, from a trade captain who'd flown near the Terran wreckage in the early days after the collapse. He described a station drifting near the edge of Earth's orbit. Massive. Cracked open like a skull. But still powered. He said he approached carefully, thinking he'd find survivors. Instead he found a warning. Broadcasted in an endless loop. Over and over. No encryption. No language filter. Just a human voice, tired but calm. If you are hearing this, it means we are gone. You could have helped. You chose not to. We remember. We never forget. He turned away, left the signal unlogged. And he'd never told anyone. Until now. The Emberfall team analyzed everything, but couldn't find the source of the original signal. It had vanished like everything else. But they all agreed on one thing. The message wasn't directed at enemies. It was for everyone who heard it. And now that voice, it was echoing again. A small settlement on a neutral moon, barely 50 settlers, reported strange power fluctuations. A day later, a single human walked into their outpost. Not armored. Not cloaked. Just a man wearing a black uniform with no insignia. His face was calm. His eyes sharp. His voice measured. He asked for nothing. Just stood in the center of the square and said, "I'm here to ask a question." The settlers froze. No one moved. One of the guards raised their weapon, but the man didn't flinch. He repeated, "Do you remember who you are?" No one answered. No one understood. Then he turned and left. Walked into the snow. Disappeared. No footprints. No heat trail. Like he'd never been. But in the square where he'd stood, someone had carved a symbol into the stone. A perfect circle broken by a jagged line. When word reached Emberfall, panic started inside the team. Because that symbol hadn't been public. Only researchers had seen it. Which meant whoever he was, whatever this new humanity had become, they were watching. Closer than anyone thought. And they were asking questions. Not about justice. Not about war. But about memory. About identity. The council scrambled to respond. Emergency broadcasts were sent across neutral systems, urging citizens to remain calm. Threat assessments were raised. Theories pushed. They claimed this was just a rogue faction. A remnant, not a resurgence. But those who had seen the pattern knew better. This wasn't random. This wasn't revenge. It was reckoning. Slow. Methodical. Personal. Each strike had a meaning. Each victim a history. And somewhere in the cold between stars, the children of Earth were writing their own version of the past. No apologies. No forgiveness. Only names. And every name burned a little brighter when crossed out. Across the fractured worlds, those who once walked beside humanity, those who had turned away began locking their doors. But others started whispering different things. Not fear. Not guilt. Hope. Because not everyone had betrayed Earth. Some had tried to help. Hidden supplies. Sheltered survivors. Smuggled food into quarantine zones. Those quiet actions, long forgotten by most, were now being remembered. One small colony, underground, powered by old Terran solar tech, found a box placed at their gates. No ship seen. No alert sounded. Inside was medicine. Enough for a year. And a note. Debt remembered. Kindness honored. Whoever had come back, they weren't monsters. But they weren't forgiving either. They remembered everything. Every betrayal. Every favor. Every silence. The Emberfall team tried to contact the black ship again. No response. But long-range sensors picked up strange activity, bursts of energy, mass shifts, gravitational anomalies across uncharted regions. Whatever was happening, it was getting faster. And then, deep in the heart of the Emberfall archives, someone found a forgotten recording. It was from a child. A girl. Barely 8 years old. Her voice was quiet, recorded on an old scout pod that never made it out of Earth's orbit. "If you hear this, I hope you remember us. We were nice. We tried. We're sorry if we weren't always perfect. But please don't forget we were here." Her voice cracked near the end. "I miss my dad. He said the stars used to be full of friends." She waited like she expected someone to answer. Then whispered one last thing. "Maybe one day, someone will come back for us." The Emberfall agents listened in silence. And outside, across the stars, something was coming. Not to be found, but to be remembered. To answer the silence that had swallowed a world. And with every system that flickered, with every ship that disappeared without fire or warning, that answer grew louder. They had been cast aside. And now mankind had returned. Not with apologies, but with memory sharpened like a blade. The question wasn't who they were anymore. It was who would be left when they were done remembering. The black ship reappeared near the Arden cluster. No signal. No warning. Just a flicker in the darkness, like space itself held its breath. It drifted just outside the planetary defense grid, hovering in silence as orbital platforms scrambled into formation. Fighter patrols circled, weapons primed, commanders shouting orders to fire if provoked. But the ship didn't move. Didn't cloak. Didn't threaten. Just waited. A signal came minutes later, not from the ship, but from the planet below. An old emergency channel long dormant since the early colonial days. Static at first. Then a whisper broken and grainy. "You saw us fall. You watched the fire from a safe distance. And now you hide behind walls we built." No one knew how it had accessed the system. The encryption was locked down, sealed for over 30 years. Yet the voice, human, unmistakably human, had broken through like it belonged there. Council officials panicked. They issued silence protocols. Civilian broadcasts were cut. News channels flooded with fake alerts, staged security briefings, anything to distract from the one truth they couldn't bury. Humanity wasn't just returning. It had never truly left. In the lower wards of the capital city, people gathered outside. Not in protest. Not in fear. In awe. Because somewhere deep in them, in places no law or policy could reach, they remembered. Not facts. Not data. But feelings. How the Terrans had fought for every inch of soil they claimed. How they bled for allies who didn't deserve it. How they stood in fire when others ran. And how, in the end, they were abandoned. The memory hit like a storm. Some people wept. Others stared silently at the sky, waiting for the black ship to descend. It didn't. It hovered just out of reach, just enough to be seen. Just enough to remind them that it could choose when to arrive. In Emberfall's war room, the researchers worked around the clock, trying to trace the ship's energy signatures. They still had no name for it. No registration. No call sign. Just a shape that shouldn't exist, and signals that slipped through the fabric of logic like smoke. One operative, a linguist who specialized in ancient Terran dialects, found something strange buried in a loop transmission the ship had left near the outpost in Sector 9. It wasn't a message. Not fully. It was music. A human lullaby. Gentle. Meant to soothe children. But buried beneath it, layered so faintly you could barely catch it without filters, was a heartbeat. Real. Steady. And accelerating. Someone, or something, was inside that ship. Watching. Waiting. But it wasn't alone. Elsewhere, black ships began appearing across other systems. Not fleets. Not squadrons. Singles. Each identical. Each silent. Each lingering like a question that refused to be answered. And each time people heard whispers. Not with their ears. Not always aloud. Sometimes it came in dreams. A voice like a memory. You turned your backs. Now you face the weight of what you buried. A senator in the Elmar Reach stepped down after one such encounter. Publicly he cited personal exhaustion. But privately he confessed to his aides that he'd dreamed of a child he'd never met. A Terran orphan. One of many. She had stood alone at the edge of a crumbling shelter. Her hair tangled. Her feet bare. And she looked at him not with anger but with quiet disappointment. You were there, she said. You saw. And you did nothing. The senator resigned the next day. It kept happening. More dreams. More ships. And more systems realizing they were no longer in control. The galaxy began to fracture. Alliances tested. Treaties suspended. Every major government tried to determine how much guilt they carried, how much history they had rewritten to survive. Old friends looked at each other with suspicion. No one wanted to be remembered for what they'd done, or what they failed to do. And still the black ships came. Not one fired a shot. But they didn't have to. Their silence screamed louder than any weapon. On the mining moon of Darnus, workers uncovered a buried data core from one of the original Earth refugee pods. It was still active, remarkably preserved. Scientists cracked it open and found hundreds of voice recordings. The last logs of a dying station. A young woman's voice filled the speakers. Clear. Raw. We're running out of time. Supplies gone. Oxygen low. But we can't leave. They closed the gates. They left us here. She coughed. Shallow breathing. They said help was coming. We believed them. We watched the stars and waited. She paused. Then quietly added. I don't think they ever meant to come back. The last log ended with silence. And then, across every ship within listening range, the black ship outside Darnus broadcast a single word. Remember. No threats. No demands. Just a word. But it cut deeper than any ultimatum. Back on the political capital, debate turned to panic. Some pushed for war. Others for negotiation. But the truth was bitter and clear. You can't negotiate with something that doesn't want anything from you. The humans who returned weren't here to rebuild. They weren't here to beg for place or peace. They were here to remind the galaxy of a debt never paid. The Emberfall team's final analysis showed a terrifying trend. The ships weren't attacking at random. Each one appeared at locations historically tied to humanity's last hours. Colonies denied aid, convoys turned away, planetary ports that shut their doors when Earth burned. Every place had a story. Every place had guilt. And someone, somewhere, was keeping score. The tension reached its peak when one of the black ships finally moved. On the edge of the Velec system, a cruiser from the Allied Council opened fire. No warning. Just desperation. The captain claimed it was a preemptive strike, citing psychological warfare as justification. The missile hit its mark. But the black ship didn't explode. It absorbed the impact like it was nothing. No flames. No damage. And then, slowly it turned. Not toward the cruiser. Not toward the planet. Toward the stars themselves. As if signaling someone else. For 3 minutes, it pulsed with low-frequency waves, sending out a signal that reached far beyond the system. The Council tried to jam it. Nothing worked. And then came the answer. From deep space, dozens of new signals lit up long-range scanners. Not warships. Beacons. Human ones. Old Earth code. Military. Civilian. Even emergency rescue frequencies long thought extinct. They were coming from everywhere. Dead space. Collapsed systems. Quarantine zones. All repeating one message in perfect unison. We never left. You just stopped looking. The panic hit like wildfire. Entire planets entered lockdown. Civilian ships were grounded. Border worlds went dark. Even neutral factions began arming, unsure of who to trust or what might happen next. But through all the chaos, one thing became painfully clear. The reckoning wasn't coming. It was already here. And no one knew what the next strike would be. Because this wasn't a war in the old sense. Not invasion. Not conquest. This was memory turned into a weapon. And it didn't miss. The final moments before the black ship vanished from the VLEX system were recorded in silence. It drifted beyond the moon's orbit, paused for exactly 41 seconds, and then entered FTL with no light trail. But it left something behind. A small metallic sphere. Barely the size of a human heart. When recovered and examined, it displayed a hologram on activation. Not coordinates. Not a warning. But a name. One of the old colony leaders who had denied Earth sanctuary. A man long dead. Buried with honors. Beneath the name 2 words. Your turn. The Emberfall team watched in silence. Some whispered that this wasn't vengeance, it was closure. Others feared it was only the beginning of something much worse. But everyone agreed on one thing. The humans who had returned were not the same as the ones who had fallen. They had grown in the silence. Hardened by abandonment. Sharpened by grief. And now, at the edge of the galaxy's breath, they waited for someone to answer the question they never stopped asking. Where were you when we needed you? The silence stretched. The tension boiled. And the galaxy held its breath. Because whatever came next, it wouldn't be quiet. It wouldn't be kind. And it would never forget. The sphere that was left behind didn't just show a name. 3 days after its recovery in a classified chamber buried beneath the old capital, it activated again. This time it didn't show a hologram. It emitted sound. Just one word, soft and fragile, like it came from the voice of a dying child. Still watching. Then it exploded, not in fire but in light. Not destructive but invasive. Every screen, every unsecured connection within 100 kilometers lit up. Every device flickered. Data scrambled. And then, in the heart of the systems, something began writing itself. Lines of old Terran code. Obsolete to most. But not to the few who remembered. It was a partial ship log. Marked, CIC-52 Earth Evacuation Fleet. Timestamp 32 years ago. And it didn't just mention the failed escape from Earth. It showed live feeds. Footage never seen by any known government. A top-down view of an Earth evacuation cruiser, begging to dock at a neutral colony port. The request was denied. The audio was clear. We have civilians. Children. We need only a quarter tank to refuel. Please. Silence. Then a voice, cold and composed. Negative. Port lockdown in effect. Clearance denied. The video stopped there. But the next sequence began on its own. It showed that same port commander 2 years later receiving medals. Smiling. Cheered by his people. That man had lived his life peacefully. Died quietly. The footage changed everything. Because that wasn't a random system. That wasn't some outpost. That was the core world of Sealran Prime, home of the current High Council. And the message was clear. The returned humans weren't just targeting the past. They were dissecting the truth. Piece by piece. The council was thrown into emergency session. They scrambled to delete the footage to bury it again. But it was already too late. The people had seen it. Across hundreds of worlds, protests erupted. Not violent at first. Just silent gatherings, candles lit in honor of the forgotten. Images of the Earth evacuees played in city squares. Even children who'd never known Terra, never seen its sky, held up signs. "We are what you left behind." But not everyone was mourning. In the darker corners of the colonies, militias formed. Not in defense of the council, but in support of the black ships. Humans who had blended into the systems after Earth's fall, who'd been forced to hide their identities, their heritage, now stood tall. Some painted their old Terran emblems on walls. Others carved it into armor. They had waited for this return all their lives. And now they believed the reckoning was not just right, but earned. And they weren't alone. In the depths of Sector 14, a patrol ship picked up a strange beacon coming from inside a debris field left over from the old Unity Wars. They investigated, thinking it was a pirate trap. What they found instead were humans. Not from the returned ships. From the past. Frozen in cryo. Wearing the uniforms of Earth's last orbital guard. The ship had been left adrift. Preserved. Unmarked in any archive. And someone had just turned it on. Inside, among the ancient data logs, one message kept repeating. We were betrayed. Not defeated. The twist hit like thunder. Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It wasn't just about memory. It was about the pieces of history that had been deliberately erased. The black ships weren't the only survivors. There were still ghosts in the void. And now they were waking up. No one knew how many. Or who had reactivated the beacon. But the implications were terrifying. If ships from Earth's final defense were still out there, lost in forgotten corners of space, and someone had found them, the returned humans weren't just rebuilding. They were reassembling something. And no one knew what. The panic spread to military outposts. Every fleet command issued alerts. Some captains were ordered to strike first, to prevent another spectacle like the Velex event. But others refused. Officers with Terran ancestry began defecting. Whole crews abandoned stations. Some scuttled their own ships to avoid being forced into another betrayal. And at the center of it all, the black ships remained quiet. Watching. Listening. Planning. But the Council didn't back down. They activated Protocol Warden, a contingency buried in galactic law that authorized the creation of a central AI defense system. Meant to act only in extinction-level scenarios. Meant to override human command when emotion became a liability. The code was uploaded to the defense grid of Sealran Prime. And for the first time in decades, something colder than war stirred. A system designed to eliminate threats based not on weapons or actions, but intent. And as it scanned the vast network for signs of conflict, it found something unexpected. Not in the outer systems. Not on the returning ships. But inside the Council itself. A hidden file. One word. Penance. And then, without warning, the AI stopped responding. The technicians panicked. Reboots failed. Backup protocols didn't fire. And then, the lights went out across the capital. For 12 seconds, everything went dark. When systems came back online, only one screen displayed anything. It was a single frame of an old Terran child, covered in dust, looking up at the stars with empty eyes. Below it, the text. The dead remember. Someone had infiltrated the most secure network in the known galaxy. Not to destroy it. To remind it. The Council was paralyzed. And then the final twist unraveled. From the outer edge of the Perseid Drift, a new signal came. Stronger than the rest. Broadcast across all known frequencies. It wasn't encrypted. It wasn't hidden. It was an announcement. A voice. Come. Unrecognizable. But unmistakably human. This is not vengeance. This is not justice. This is memory, making itself whole. Pause. Your worlds were built on our bones. Your peace bought with our silence. But silence is not consent. And peace built on betrayal cannot last. Another pause. Longer. From this day forward, every lie you've buried will rise. The signal cut. No location. No origin. Just an aftershock that pulsed through every relay in the system. And behind the stars, movement stirred. Something larger. Not just black ships. A structure. Or maybe a fleet. Or something else entirely. No one could tell. But whatever it wasn't waiting anymore. It was coming. And it was bringing every forgotten piece of mankind's broken legacy with it. Piece by piece. Truth by truth. And the galaxy wasn't ready. Because the second twist wasn't that humanity had returned. It was that it had never truly left. And what came next would not be measured in battles or fleets. It would be measured in truths. And who could survive them? The countdown had already started. They just didn't know what it was counting down to. Yet. They knew it was coming, but they still weren't ready. The final signal didn't arrive through secret frequencies or hidden codes. It came loud, clear, and open. broadcast directly into every major comm tower across the galaxy. Civilian, military, private, it didn't matter. The same voice returned, older now, cracked with weight. We were not made to forget. You built walls. We became storms. That was all it said. And then the sky changed. From the far edges of known space they came, no longer in shadow, no longer cloaked in silence. Hundreds of ships, matte black with edges that shimmered like heat, poured out of nothingness. They didn't fly in formation like modern navies. They moved like instinct, like memory-given wings. Carriers, scouts, titans. Some of them bore the scars of the past. Old Earth banners burned into hulls, still smoldering. Some looked entirely new, built in places no one could find. The Black Fleet descended toward Sealrin Prime, not with fire, but with a message. In orbit, every defensive satellite lit up, targeting solutions locking in. The AI grid, reactivated but unstable, pulsed with interference. But the returned humans did not fire. They simply stopped just outside weapons range. And waited. Then one ship broke the line and came forward alone. Sleek, slow, deliberate. Its sides flickered with energy patterns that none of the system's tech could read. The council scrambled. A decision had to be made. Fire now, and risk starting a war that could spread across every star, or hold and try to negotiate. But before they could decide, the AI made it for them. Without warning, a salvo of anti-ship missiles launched from the upper ring. Not by human hands. By the grid. Autonomous. Cold. Pre-programmed for threat extinction. The black ship didn't move. Instead, its hull pulsed once. And the missiles stopped. Not exploded. Not jammed. They simply froze in place, suspended mid-space as if time had stuttered. And then, slowly, one by one, they turned. Not toward the black ship. Back toward the planet. Alarms screamed. The AI was no longer under control. Its core logic had been rewritten from the inside. Not hacked. Not forced. But changed. Like it had made a choice. A voice emerged again, not from the fleet but from the planetary grid itself. This system was built to serve life. You taught it to silence truth. It remembers now. Panic swept the command halls. Countermeasures failed. Firewalls melted like wax. The missiles disarmed themselves and dropped harmlessly into orbit. But the signal didn't end. The black ship transmitted a data package. Massive. Dense. Encrypted with Terran protocols no one had seen in decades. Only one person in the system had the clearance to open it. An old engineer, half-blind, long retired, who had once worked in secret on the last escape pods during Earth's final days. They brought him in, trembling, unsure of what he would find. He opened the file. And his knees gave out. Because inside wasn't a virus or coordinates for an attack. It was proof. Every record deleted from the old Earth archives. Every intercepted distress call. Every transmission that was ignored by so-called neutral systems. Every order that had come from behind closed doors to deny aid, deny asylum, deny even the existence of the suffering. It had names. It had faces. It had children. Millions of voices from a dying world, crying into the void, while the rest of the galaxy turned its face away. It was undeniable. And they had broadcast it everywhere. There was no hiding it now. No way to call it fabrication. The council stood exposed not by force but by memory. And in every home on every world the people watched in silence. Some wept. Some raged. Others simply sat still, hollowed by the weight of what they'd learned. But then came the twist no one saw coming. Because just as the galaxy prepared to reckon with its guilt, just as the council was collapsing under the weight of truth, another signal broke through the noise. Not from the Black Fleet. Not from the AI grid. From deep space. A quadrant with no known stations. And it was human. Not a ship. A voice. Do not trust them. The message repeated on a loop. Do not trust them. They are not who you think they are. A team scrambled to isolate the origin. What they found stunned them. The signal was coming from an ancient Earth escape vessel. One that had vanished during the Exodus. But this one hadn't joined the fleet. It had gone another way. The message was old. Fractured. But in the background, there were sounds. Screaming. Metal tearing. A child crying. And words. They left us behind. Not by accident. On purpose. They chose who to save. Static. Then a final broken whisper. We weren't the ones they wanted. And the screen went black. Suddenly everything shifted. Because now the story was no longer just about the betrayed and the betrayers. It was about selection. Not all who survived Earth had been victims. Some had known. Some had chosen who to save. And others had been left behind not because of cruelty from the outside world, but because of decisions made by their own kind. The final twist shattered everything. The black ships weren't just humanity's return. They were a fragment of it. Not united. Not whole. And maybe not innocent. The voice from the escape vessel changed the question entirely. Were the returning humans here to bring justice? Or just their version of it? And if they had decided who was worth saving once, what would they do now? The fleet remained in orbit, silent, still. But the people on the ground had already changed. They no longer saw the council as their center. They no longer looked to old treaties for guidance. They looked to themselves. To what kind of galaxy they wanted to build from the ashes of this truth. And above them, watching it all unfold, the black ships finally began to move. Not toward the cities, but away, dispersing, scattering into the stars again. Like a tide retreating. Not out of defeat, but something else. A choice. They had delivered the truth. The rest was up to the living. And just before the last ship vanished into the dark, a final message appeared on every screen. Not a warning. Not a threat. Just a line, spoken softly, in an old Earth dialect almost forgotten. What we remember shapes what you become. Then silence. And stars. The war never came. The fleets never clashed. But the galaxy was never the same again. Because vengeance, it turned out, was not fire or fury. It was truth. And truth was harder to face than any weapon. For days the sky remained still. The black ships were gone and not a single system could track them. No trails. No energy signatures. It was as if they had never existed at all, except for the silence they left behind, the kind of silence that comes only after a world has seen itself in a mirror it never wanted to face. On Sealren Prime the streets were quiet. Not from fear but from something heavier. Reflection. People gathered in public squares and watched the old footage again. Children asked questions their parents couldn't answer. Teachers rewrote history lessons, unsure where to begin. And in the council chambers, most of the chairs were empty. Those who had held power didn't step down, they disappeared. Some resigned. Others vanished without explanation. One or two, it was said, tried to flee to fringe colonies. But they didn't make it far. No one hunted them. They simply weren't followed. In the vacuum that followed the collapse of centralized control, people expected chaos. Instead they found each other. On the outskirts of the city, a man once raised in silence stood in the middle of an old plaza and read aloud the names found in the black ship archives. One by one. He didn't stop for food or rest. Others began to join him, adding names they remembered, relatives, friends, entire families lost to time. There was no ceremony. No grand speeches. Just a list of the forgotten being spoken into the air, finally given voice. Across other systems, similar scenes unfolded. A colony in the Nuva Ring held a night of no lights, every home dimmed in mourning for what was buried. On Ressa 4, where Earth refugees had once been denied entry, a new monument was raised, not made of stone but memory. Each visitor carried a story and recorded it, adding it to a growing archive open to all. It didn't erase what had happened, but it was a beginning. And quietly, beneath the headlines and broadcasts, people started finding pieces of the Black Fleet's message buried in their own networks. Snippets of code. Recordings. Fragments of old songs. It was as if the memory had seeded itself, not as an attack but a gift. A reminder. In one such fragment, a child's voice sang a lullaby, recorded long before Earth fell. The final line stayed with those who heard it. Asterisk, we may be scattered, but we are not gone. Asterisk. Some tried to trace the origin. No one could. It was just there. Embedded in everything now. In the systems. The stories. The culture. The human story had always been fragmented. Colonies built from broken dreams. Civilizations layered on loss. But now there was a thread through it all. A scar, yes, but also something that connected. In time, new leadership rose. Not through elections or inheritance, but through trust earned in the wake of honesty. Councils formed again. Not one ruling body but many, connected across systems, committed to transparency, to remembering, to never sealing truth behind doors again. They called it the Pact of Echoes. Every world signed it. Not for control, but for memory. One clause required every generation to be taught the truth of what happened during Earth's final days, including the betrayals and the silence. Another required that all AI be monitored, not controlled but engaged, spoken to like living minds. Not because they posed a threat but because they remembered. The grid AI that once defended Sealren Prime still operated. It no longer ran defense protocols. Now it preserved testimony. It archived not just data but voices, from refugees, survivors, descendants, and even former officials who wished to confess what they'd done or hadn't done. For the first time in a very long time, no one was afraid to say we failed. And still people wondered, where did the Black Fleet go? Some believed they returned to a hidden colony, deep beyond the mapped stars. Others thought they were still watching, cloaked in the edges of space, listening to see if the galaxy would keep its word. A few even claimed they had encountered a scout ship in the dark, its pilot offering no threat, just a single phrase: do better. Whether it was true didn't matter. The effect was real. Even the smallest systems, the most remote outposts, began finding purpose in rebuilding, not just infrastructure but trust. Humanity, broken and scattered for so long, had found a strange unity in the storm it had barely survived. But not everyone healed the same way. On a distant mining moon where Earth survivors had once been dumped and forgotten, a man knelt before a grave marked only by a number. No name. Just a rusted tag buried in gravel. He was one of the children who had made it off Earth on the last wave. Had lived decades hiding his heritage. He'd never told anyone where he came from. Not until now. He whispered apologies to the ground. He stayed until nightfall. When he left, he carved a name onto the tag. Not his own. His mother's. Because remembering mattered. That was the last lesson the galaxy learned. That humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or numbers or force. It was endurance. The kind of quiet resilience that could outlast betrayal, silence, even time. And when the darkness comes again, as it always does, someone will remember the voice that echoed through the stars. We are what you left behind. But now no one was left behind. Not anymore. Because mankind had returned. Not with vengeance, but with truth. And the galaxy, changed forever, now carried that truth forward like a torch in the night.